she whispered in class, until her combat skills were revealed. Part 1. The Galactic Academy's classroom hummed with the quiet energy of focused minds. Holographic star charts floated above each desk, displaying the complex orbital mechanics that would be crucial for any future space navigator. Among the sea of alien faces, scaled reptilians, crystalline Vorthak, and towering Gorinth, sat one small human figure hunched over her desk. Sarah Chen barely whispered when called upon, her voice so soft that Professor Kethval had to strain his 4 ears to hear her responses. The other students had grown accustomed to her timid nature over the past 3 months. She was just another quiet human, they assumed, probably overwhelmed by being surrounded by species that had been traveling the stars for millennia, while her people had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel. Miss Chen, Professor Kethaval's deep voice rumbled through the classroom, his reptilian features showing mild annoyance. Can you explain the gravitational effects when 3 gas giants align in the Proxima system? Sarah's voice came out barely above a whisper, forcing everyone to lean forward. The combined gravitational pull creates a slingshot effect that can accelerate ships by 37%. But the tidal forces make it dangerous for anything larger than a cruiser-class vessel. Her answer was technically perfect, as always. Sarah consistently scored in the top 5% of her class, yet she delivered every response as if apologizing for speaking at all. The Vorthak student beside her, whose crystalline form chimed softly with amusement, often wondered how someone so knowledgeable could seem so afraid of her own voice. After class, Sarah gathered her materials quickly, hoping to slip away before anyone could approach her. She had learned early in her time at the academy that drawing attention usually led to uncomfortable questions about Earth and humanity's brief spacefaring history. Most species viewed humans as the galaxy's newest children, barely worthy of notice. As she hurried down the corridor, her shoulder bag caught on the edge of a doorframe, spilling her data tablets across the floor. Before she could react, a massive foot came down hard, crushing one of the devices. Sarah looked up to see Grexthor, a Gorinth warrior caste student who stood nearly 3 meters tall and whose people prided themselves on physical dominance. Clumsy little human, Grexthor growled, his voice like grinding stone. Perhaps you should crawl on the ground where you belong instead of pretending you can walk among warriors. A small crowd began to gather, drawn by the confrontation. The Gorinth were known for their aggressive nature, and incidents like this were not uncommon at the academy. Most species simply gave them space, understanding that their culture valued strength above all else. Sarah knelt to gather her scattered belongings, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not making eye contact. "It was an accident." Grexthor's laugh boomed through the corridor. "Of course it was, little mouse. Everything about your pathetic species is an accident. You stumbled into space travel, stumbled into this academy, and now you stumble around getting in the way of your betters," the crowd murmured, some uncomfortable with the Gorinth's words but unwilling to intervene. Confronting a warrior caste member rarely ended well for anyone involved. Sarah continued gathering her things, her movements quick and efficient despite her apparent distress. "Look at it, Scurry," Grexthor continued, clearly enjoying the attention. "This is what the mighty human race produces?" Whispers and trembling. "No wonder your people hide behind technology instead of facing enemies with honor." Sarah's hands stopped moving for just a moment, and something flickered across her face too quickly for most observers to catch. But she simply finished collecting her belongings and stood up, keeping her eyes downcast. "I need to get to my next class," she said softly, attempting to move around the massive Gorinth. Grexthor stepped sideways, blocking her path. "Did I give you permission to leave, human? Perhaps you need to learn proper respect for your superiors." The tension in the corridor grew thick. Several students shifted uncomfortably, while others watched with morbid curiosity. The academy's policies strictly forbade violence between students, but the Gorinth had ways of pushing boundaries without technically breaking rules. Professor Kethaval chose that moment to emerge from his classroom, his reptilian eyes quickly assessing the situation. "Is there a problem here, students?" Grexthor immediately stepped back, his expression shifting to innocence. "No problem, Professor. Just having a friendly conversation with our human classmate about cultural differences." The professor's gaze moved between them, clearly understanding more than what was being said. "Miss Chen, are you well?" Sarah nodded quickly, clutching her bag tighter. Yes, Professor. Just dropped my materials. Everything's fine. Kethaval studied her for a moment longer, noting the slight tremor in her voice and the way she avoided everyone's eyes. He had taught at the academy for over 40 years, and had seen every type of student interaction possible. Something about this situation felt off, but without clear evidence of wrongdoing, his hands were tied. Very well, he said finally. I suggest all students proceed to their next classes. The academy values punctuality. The crowd began to disperse, disappointed that the confrontation had ended so tamely. Grexthor shot Sarah one last contemptuous look before striding away, his heavy footsteps echoing through the corridor. Sarah waited until he was completely gone before moving, her path taking her in the opposite direction. As she walked, Sarah passed a maintenance alcove where cleaning drones worked silently. For just a moment she paused and looked back down the corridor where Grexthor had disappeared. Her expression was unreadable, but her posture had subtly changed. The trembling had stopped, and there was something in her stance that suggested coiled energy rather than fear. Then the moment passed, and she was once again the quiet, whispering student who seemed afraid of her own shadow. She continued toward her next class, Advanced Combat Theory, taught by Commander Vexlar, a decorated reptilian officer who had seen action in 3 different galactic conflicts. As Sarah entered the combat theory classroom, she took her usual seat in the back corner, away from the other students. The irony was not lost on her that someone who seemed so afraid of confrontation was enrolled in one of the Academy's most challenging military courses. But then again, there were many things about Sarah Chen that her classmates didn't know, things that perhaps they were better off not knowing. She whispered in class, until her combat skills were revealed. Part 2, Commander Vexalar's scarred hide told the story of countless battles across the galaxy. His left eye was cybernetic, a replacement from his days fighting the Hive Queens in the Outer Rim. When he spoke about combat, every student listened with absolute attention, except for the small human in the back who seemed more interested in taking notes than engaging with the, material. Today we discuss close quarters. Combat in zero-gravity environments, Vexlar announced, his voice carrying the weight of experience. Who can tell me the primary challenge when fighting without artificial gravity? Several hands shot up around the classroom. Grexthor's massive arms stretched toward the ceiling, confident as always. A few reptilian students raised clawed hands, while the crystalline Vorthak students' form chimed softly to indicate participation. Vexalar's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on the back of the classroom. Miss Chen, you haven't participated in discussion this week. Enlighten us. Sarah's voice came out as barely a whisper, forcing the entire class to strain forward. Newton's third law becomes your enemy. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Strike your opponent and you push yourself away with the same force. Most species try to anchor themselves, but that limits mobility and creates predictable patterns. The answer was textbook perfect, delivered in that same apologetic tone she used for everything. Commander Vexlar nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Adequate. Can you elaborate on effective countermeasures? Sarah's hands fidgeted with her stylus. Grappling techniques that redirect force instead of opposing it. Use your opponent's mass as an anchor while maintaining fluid movement. The key is thinking in 3 dimensions instead of trying to recreate ground-based fighting patterns in space. Again, technically flawless. Vexlar made a note on his datapad, wondering how someone who spoke about combat with such clinical precision could seem so uncomfortable with the mere concept of conflict. Grexthor snorted loudly. Easy enough to recite theory, human. Combat is about warrior spirit, not hiding behind words and calculations. Sarah's eyes dropped to her desk and she didn't respond. The Gorinth's comment drew murmurs of agreement from several students who shared his species' emphasis on physical prowess over tactical thinking. Interesting perspective. Cadet Grexthor, Commander Vexlar said, his tone carefully neutral. Perhaps you'd like to demonstrate these warrior principles. Report to Combat Bay 7 after class for practical exercises. Grexthor's chest swelled with pride. It would be my honor, Commander. Excellent. Miss Chen, you'll be his opponent. The classroom fell silent. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes wide with what appeared to be panic. Commander, I don't think... The Academy requires all students to participate in practical combat exercises, Vexlar interrupted. Theory without application is worthless. You seem to understand the concepts well enough. Time to prove whether that knowledge has any real value. Several students exchanged glances. The idea of the timid human facing off against a Goranth warrior seemed almost cruel. Grexthor grinned, showing teeth that could crush steel. "This should be educational," he rumbled. "The little mouse can learn what real combat feels like." Sarah's hands trembled as she gathered her materials. "Commander, isn't there another way to assess my understanding? Maybe a written examination or Combat Bay 7, 1 hour. Vexlar's tone brooked no argument. "Full safety protocols will be in effect, of course. The goal is education, not injury." As the class dispersed, Sarah remained seated while students filed past her. Some looked sympathetic, others curious about the coming mismatch. Grexthor paused beside her desk, his shadow falling across her like a storm cloud. "Don't worry, little human," he said, his voice mockingly gentle. "I'll try to end it quickly. Wouldn't want you to suffer unnecessarily." Sarah didn't look up or respond, but her knuckles had gone white where she gripped her stylus. Grexthor laughed and moved on, already anticipating his easy victory. The hour passed slowly for Sarah. She sat in the academy's observation deck, staring out at the stars while other students came and went around her. Her reflection in the transparent aluminum showed a small, unremarkable human who looked like she belonged in a library rather than a combat training facility. When the time came, she made her way to Combat Bay 7 with reluctant steps. The facility was designed for zero-gravity training, its walls lined with impact-absorbing materials and emergency med systems. Commander Vexlar waited inside, along with a small crowd of students who had come to watch the spectacle. "Standard protective gear is required," Vexlar announced as Sarah and Grexthor entered the preparation area. "Impact suits, neural dampeners to prevent serious injury, and kinetic absorption fields. This is a learning exercise, not a deathmatch." Grexthor's protective gear barely fit his massive frame, while Sarah's hung loose on her small form. She moved slowly, checking each piece of equipment multiple times as if hoping to delay the inevitable. "The exercise will last 5 minutes, or until one participant yields," Vexlar continued. "Victory conditions include pinning your opponent for 10 seconds, forcing them to tap out, or demonstrating clear superiority. Are there any questions?" Sarah raised her hand tentatively. "Commander, what if—" "No more delays, Miss Chen. Enter the combat area." The zero-gravity chamber activated with a soft hum, and both students floated into the training space. Grexthor moved with surprising grace for someone his size, clearly comfortable in the weightless environment. Sarah drifted awkwardly, appearing to struggle with the basic mechanics of movement. "Begin," Commander Vexlar announced. Grexthor launched himself forward immediately, using his powerful legs to generate tremendous speed. His strategy was simple and effective: close the distance quickly and end the fight with overwhelming force. It was a textbook Goranth approach, relying on natural advantages in size and strength. Sarah appeared to panic, pushing off a wall in an uncontrolled spin that sent her tumbling through the center of the chamber. Grexthor adjusted his trajectory to intercept her, confident that the clumsy human had just made his job easier. The two forms collided in the center of the training space. To the watching students, it looked like exactly what they had expected: a large, powerful warrior overwhelming a small, frightened opponent. Grexthor's triumphant roar echoed through the chamber, but something was wrong. The roar cut off abruptly, replaced by a sound of confusion and pain. When the two figures separated, it was Grexthor who was spinning out of control, while Sarah floated motionless in the center of the chamber. She was no longer trembling. Her posture had changed completely, and for the first time since arriving at the academy, Sarah Chen was not whispering. She whispered in class, until her combat skills were revealed. Part 3. The silence in Combat Bay 7 was deafening. Grexthor floated against the far wall, his massive form temporarily stunned and struggling to understand what had just happened. One moment he had been closing in for an easy victory. The next he found himself spinning helplessly through zero gravity, with his left arm twisted at an uncomfortable angle. Sarah hovered in the center of the chamber, no longer the trembling, whispering student everyone knew. Her movements were controlled and precise, each micro-adjustment calculated to maintain perfect positioning. The transformation was so complete that several watching students wondered if this was the same person who had apologized for breathing too loudly just an hour earlier. "What just happened?" whispered Zethara, a young reptilian student, her scaled features showing confusion. Commander Vexlar's cybernetic eye whirred as it analyzed the encounter. His experienced mind had caught details that the students missed. The way Sarah's apparent panic had been perfectly timed, how her clumsy tumble had actually been a complex rotational maneuver that gave her multiple attack vectors, and most importantly, the lightning-fast precision with which she had neutralized Grexthor's charge. Grexthor shook his head, clearing his vision, and pushed off from the wall with renewed fury. "Lucky strike, human. Let's see you try that again." This time his approach was more cautious but no less aggressive. He used the chamber's handholds to change direction unpredictably, trying to prevent Sarah from anticipating his attack angle. It was a more sophisticated technique than his first bull rush, showing why the Gorinth were respected as warriors throughout the galaxy. Sarah's response was subtle. She shifted position slightly, rotating to track his movement, but otherwise remained stationary. To most observers, she looked passive, almost resigned to being overwhelmed by the larger opponent's superior tactics. Grexthor feinted left, then pushed off a wall to come at her from below, his massive hands reaching to grab and pin her smaller form. It was a move that should have ended the match decisively. Instead, Sarah flowed like water around his grasping arms. Her movement was so smooth it seemed effortless, as if she had known exactly what he was planning before he did it. In the span of a heartbeat, she had slipped past his guard and struck 3 precise points along his torso. Grexthor's protective gear absorbed most of the impact, but the targeting was so accurate that even through the safety systems, he felt his nervous system stutter. His arms went numb for several seconds, sending him into another uncontrolled spin. "Impossible," breathed another student. "She's half his size. How is she doing this?" Commander Vexlar was beginning to understand, and what he was seeing made him deeply uncomfortable. Sarah's techniques weren't just good, they were extraordinary. More troubling, they were specifically designed for combating larger, stronger opponents. Every movement suggested training that went far beyond anything taught at the academy. Grexthor recovered more quickly this time, his warrior instincts overriding his confusion. He began moving in rapid, unpredictable patterns, using his superior reach to try to keep Sarah at a distance while looking for openings. It was a reasonable strategy against an opponent who had proven dangerous at close range. Sarah's response was to become perfectly still again, tracking his movement with her eyes but making no effort to close the distance. She seemed content to wait, studying his patterns with the patience of a predator watching prey. "Is she going to do anything?" Grexthor called out, frustration evident in his voice. "Or are you just going to float there like debris?" For the first time since the match began, Sarah spoke. Her voice was no longer a whisper, but it was still quiet, carrying clearly through the chamber with an undertone that made several students shiver. "You're telegraphing your next 3 moves," she said calmly. "Left wall push, rotate clockwise, strike with your right hand toward my center mass. After that, you'll try to grab with your left while I'm supposedly stunned by the impact." Grexthor's eyes widened. That was exactly what he had been planning. "You favor your right side because of an old injury to your left shoulder," Sarah continued, her analysis clinical and precise. "Your species' combat doctrine emphasizes overwhelming force, but you've been taught to fear fighting smaller opponents because your size makes you vulnerable to precision strikes, so you overcompensate with excessive aggression." The watching students were transfixed. This wasn't just combat analysis, it was psychological warfare delivered in the same tone Sarah used to discuss homework assignments. "You're angry now," she observed as Grexthor's face darkened with rage. "Anger makes you predictable. You'll abandon strategy and try to end this with raw power, which is exactly what I've been waiting for." Grexthor roared and launched himself at her with all the fury his massive frame could generate. It was exactly the response Sarah had predicted, and she was ready for it. What happened next was too fast for most observers to follow clearly. Sarah moved like liquid lightning, flowing around Grexthor's attack with movements that seemed to violate physics. She struck him once, twice, 3 times with surgical precision, before using his own momentum to send him spinning into the far wall with considerably more force than before. This time Grexthor didn't get back up immediately. He floated against the wall, conscious but clearly stunned, his protective gear systems blinking warning lights. Commander Vexillar activated the emergency stop, restoring gravity to the chamber. Both combatants settled gently to the floor, but while Grexthor needed several moments to find his balance, Sarah landed lightly on her feet as if she had been expecting the transition. Match concluded, Vexillar announced, his voice carefully controlled. Medical scan shows no serious injuries. Cadet Grexthor, report to the medical bay for standard post-combat evaluation. As medical drones attended to the stunned Gorinth, the other students stared at Sarah with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. The transformation they had witnessed went beyond anything they had thought possible. Sarah's posture began to shift back toward her usual demeanor, but she couldn't quite return to the trembling mouse everyone thought they knew. Too much had been revealed, and there was no way to simply stuff that knowledge back into the shadows. Commander Vexillar approached her, his cybernetic eyes scanning her with new interest. Miss Chen, I believe we need to have a conversation. My office, immediately after class. Sarah nodded silently, but for the first time since arriving at the academy, she didn't apologize or whisper her response. The mask had slipped, and everyone present knew that things would never be quite the same again. She whispered in class, until her combat skills were revealed. Part 4 Commander Vexillar's office reflected the organized mind of a career military officer. Star charts covered one wall, showing deployment patterns from conflicts spanning decades. His desk held commendations from 4 different species governments, a reminder that his reputation extended far beyond the academy. The chair across from his desk was designed for standard humanoid proportions, which meant Sarah looked even smaller than usual as she sat waiting for his questions. But she no longer carried herself like the frightened student who had whispered her way through 3 months of classes. Her posture was alert, ready, and Commander Vexillar found himself reconsidering everything he thought he knew about human capabilities. Your performance today was remarkable, he began, his scarred fingers drumming against the desk surface. Grexthor is considered one of our most promising combat students. His species has been perfecting warrior techniques for millennia, yet you neutralized him with apparent ease. Sarah remained silent, her hands folded in her lap. The trembling was gone, but she seemed to be weighing every word before speaking. More concerning, Vexillar continued, is that your techniques suggest training far beyond anything provided by standard human military academies. The precision of your strikes, the predictive analysis of your opponent's movements, the psychological warfare, these are advanced special operations skills. He leaned forward, his cybernetic eye focusing on her with mechanical precision. So I'll ask directly, Miss Chen, what exactly is your background? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at a point just over his shoulder. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but no longer the whisper everyone had grown accustomed to. I was hoping it wouldn't come to this, she said. I really was just trying to learn alongside everyone else. That's not an answer. She sighed, a sound that carried more weight than any sound that small frame should have been able to produce. My name is Sarah Chen, that much is true. I'm 18 years old, also true. But I'm not just another academy student. Vexillar waited, his experience telling him that patience would yield more information than pressure. I was born on a colony ship, Sarah continued, one of the generation ships that left Earth before faster-than-light travel was discovered. We were 57 years into a journey that was supposed to take 300 years when everything went wrong. She paused, organizing her thoughts with the same precision she had shown in combat. Pirates found us. Not the romanticized raiders you see in entertainment feeds, real pirates. The kind that take colony ships apart piece by piece, selling the technology and enslaving the population. We had no weapons, no military training, nothing but civilian colonists trying to reach a new world. Vexillar's expression grew more serious. Attacks on colony ships were considered among the most heinous crimes in galactic law. But enforcement in the deep void between systems was nearly impossible. They boarded us in 3 waves. Sarah's voice remained steady, but something in her eyes suggested she was seeing events from years past. The first wave was meant to disable our systems. The second was to secure key areas. The third was to begin processing the population, deciding who was valuable enough to sell and who wasn't. She looked directly at him for the first time since entering his office. I was 7 years old when they killed my parents. My little brother was 5. They shot my father because he tried to protect my mother. They shot my mother because she tried to protect us. They were going to shoot us too, but someone decided children might be worth keeping alive. Commander Vexillar had seen war in all its forms. But something about Sarah's matter-of-fact delivery made his stomach tighten. She spoke of trauma that would have broken most beings with the same clinical tone she used to discuss navigation theory. The pirates kept us for 3 years, she continued. Not as prisoners exactly. More like projects they found it amusing to train human children as weapons. Small, unassuming, capable of getting close to targets that would never suspect danger from something so harmless looking. The implications hit Vexillar like a physical blow. They turned you into assassins. Among other things, Sarah's voice remained steady. Humans, we discovered, have certain advantages in covert operations. We're smaller than most species. We appear non-threatening and we adapt quickly to new environments. More importantly, we're social creatures. Other species trust us because we seem so obviously inferior. She gestured to herself, a bitter smile crossing her face. Look at me, Commander. I'm exactly what every species expects from humanity. Small, quiet, apologetic, trying desperately to fit in among our betters. The perfect camouflage. Vexillar was beginning to understand the full scope of what he was dealing with. How did you escape? We didn't escape. We were rescued. Sarah's expression darkened. Earth's first FTL ships found the pirates' base when I was 13. The rescue operation was thorough. Earth's military had been searching for missing colony ships for years. And when they found what the pirates had done, she trailed off, but Vexillar could fill in the gaps. Earth's response to discovering enslaved human children would have been swift and devastating. The rescue teams found 47 human children who had been taken from various colony ships. Over the years, Sarah continued, most of us were badly damaged, psychologically speaking. The Earth government didn't know what to do with us. We were too trained to be normal children, too young to be treated as soldiers. So they sent you here, Vexillar realized, to the academy, not just me. There are others scattered throughout the galaxy, placed in various institutions where we can learn to be normal. The hope is that education and time will help us develop into functional members of society instead of living weapons. She looked down at her hands. And for the first time, Vexillar saw something of the frightened child beneath the trained operative. I really was trying to be just another student, Commander. I wanted to whisper and tremble and be afraid of my own shadow because that felt like what a normal person would do. But when that Gorinth challenged me, your training took over. More than that. Sarah's voice grew smaller. For just a moment, I wanted to hurt him. Really hurt him. Not disable or subdue. I wanted to make him suffer for threatening me. That's what they trained into us, Commander. That's what I'm trying so hard not to be. Commander Vexillar sat back in his chair, processing the implications of her revelation. He was looking at a survivor of one of the galaxy's worst crimes, a child who had been forged into a weapon and was now desperately trying to become something else. The question was, what was he going to do about it? She whispered in class. Until her combat skills were revealed, Part 5 news of Sarah's combat performance spread through the academy faster than plasma fire. By the time she left Commander Vexillar's office, clusters of students had gathered in corridors, their conversations dropping to whispers whenever she passed. The transformation from timid human to lethal fighter had shattered everyone's preconceptions about her species and her personally. Word had also reached the academy's administration. Within hours, Sarah found herself summoned to the office of Chancellor Morthak, the Academy's highest authority. The Chancellor was an ancient being whose species had achieved spaceflight before most others had developed written language. His office reflected that age and wisdom, filled with artifacts from dozens of civilizations. Sarah sat across from the Chancellor's massive desk, feeling smaller than ever. Beside him stood Professor Kethvel and 2 other faculty members she didn't recognize. The mood in the room was tense, uncertain. Miss Chen, Chancellor Morthak's voice carried the weight of centuries. Commander Vexillar has briefed us on your background. This presents us with a unique situation. Sarah waited, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had known this moment would come eventually. The whispered mouse act could only last so long. The Academy has always prided itself on educating the galaxy's future leaders, the Chancellor continued. We accept students based on academic merit and potential, not their species' political standing or military capabilities. However, your case raises questions we've never had to address before. Professor Cathaval stepped forward, his reptilian features showing concern. Miss Chen, were you honest about your reasons for enrolling here? Are you genuinely seeking education? Or do you have another agenda? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah looked at each of the faculty members in turn, knowing that her answer would determine whether she remained at the academy or found herself expelled and probably shipped back to Earth. I want to be normal, she said simply. I know that sounds strange coming from someone with my background, but it's true. I've spent my entire life being shaped by other people's violence. The pirates made me into a weapon. Earth's military wanted to turn me into a soldier. I came here because I thought maybe, for the first time, I could choose what I wanted to become. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I love studying navigation theory and stellar mechanics. I find Professor Cathaval's lectures on orbital dynamics fascinating. When I solve complex equations or learn about different species' cultures, I feel like I'm building something instead of just being good at breaking things. Chancellor Morthak studied her carefully. His species were natural empaths, able to sense deception and emotional states with remarkable accuracy. What he sensed from Sarah was exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness of someone who had been fighting battles her entire life and desperately wanted to stop. Your academic performance has been exemplary, he acknowledged. Your instructors report that you're curious, insightful, and respectful. But today's events demonstrate that you possess capabilities that far exceed anything we've seen from a student. I can't change what I am, Sarah replied, but I can choose how I use it. Today was the first time since arriving here that I've hurt someone, and it was only because I was forced into a combat situation. One of the other faculty members, a tall humanoid with silver skin, spoke up. Miss Chen, are there others like you? Other humans with your training? Sarah hesitated. This was dangerous territory. Earth's government had gone to great lengths to place the rescued children in situations where they could heal and develop normally. Revealing their locations could put them all at risk. There might be, she said carefully. But if there are, they're probably trying to do the same thing I am. Learn to be something other than what they were made to be. Chancellor Morthak exchanged glances with the other faculty members. Some form of silent communication passed between them before he turned back to Sarah. Miss Chen, we're prepared to allow you to continue your studies here, with certain conditions. Sarah felt relief wash over her, though she tried not to show it. First, the Chancellor continued, you will undergo regular counseling sessions with our psychological staff. Your background suggests trauma that needs to be addressed properly. Sarah nodded. She had been expecting something like this. Second, you will work with Commander Vexlar to develop appropriate channels for your combat training. It's clear that attempting to suppress your abilities entirely is neither healthy nor realistic. Better to acknowledge them and ensure they're properly directed. This was unexpected but not unwelcome. Sarah had felt the strain of constantly holding back, constantly pretending to be helpless. Third, Chancellor Morthak's voice grew more serious. You will report any contact from Earth's military or intelligence services. Your presence here is as a student, not as an operative, and we intend to ensure it remains that way. I understand, Sarah said. Finally, the Chancellor leaned forward. You will help us understand what humanity is truly capable of. Not for military intelligence or strategic advantage, but because your species is new to the galactic community, and we need to better understand how to integrate human students into our programs. Sarah considered this last condition carefully. It meant giving up some of the anonymity she had treasured, but it also meant she could stop pretending to be something she wasn't. I can do that, she agreed. Professor Cathaval stepped forward again. Miss Chen, I want you to know that your academic standing remains unchanged. Today's events don't affect your grades or your standing in my classes. However, I suspect your relationships with other students may become more complicated. As if summoned by his words, a soft chime indicated someone requesting entry. Chancellor Morthak activated the door and Grexthor entered, his massive frame moving stiffly from his earlier encounter with Sarah. The Goranth student's presence filled the room with tension. His species' pride made it difficult for them to accept defeat under the best circumstances, and being bested by someone he had considered weak and inferior would be especially challenging. But instead of anger or resentment, Grexthor's expression showed something unexpected: curiosity and, perhaps, respect, Chancellor, he said formally.
I request permission to address the human student. Morthek nodded slowly.
Permission granted. Grexthor turned to Sarah, studying her as if seeing her for the first time. Human Sarah Chen, he said carefully. I came to apologize for my earlier behavior and to ask you a question. Sarah blinked in surprise. This was not what she had expected. My species values strength above all else, Grexthor continued. Today you demonstrated strength that I failed to recognize. I dishonored myself by treating a superior warrior as if she were weak prey. The formal language made Sarah uncomfortable, but she remained silent as he continued. My question is this: would you be willing to teach me some of your techniques? My pride was injured today, but my mind was opened. I would learn from one who has proven superior in combat. Sarah looked around the room, seeing expressions ranging from surprise to concern among the faculty. This was entirely uncharted territory for everyone involved. I'm not a teacher, she said slowly, and I'm not sure my techniques are something that should be spread around. Perhaps, Chancellor Morthek interjected, this could be part of our new arrangement. Working with other students to share knowledge could be beneficial for everyone involved, including you, Miss Chen. Sarah realized that her carefully constructed quiet life at the academy was over. The mask had been removed and there was no going back to whispers and trembling. But maybe, she thought, that wasn't such a terrible thing. Maybe it was time to stop hiding from what she was and start figuring out what she could become. She whispered in class, until her combat skills were revealed, Part 6. 3 weeks after the combat demonstration, the academy had settled into a new rhythm. Sarah no longer whispered in classes. Though her voice remained soft and measured, students who had previously ignored her now watched her movements with mixture of respect and wariness. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. She was finally allowing herself to be seen. The most significant change was in Combat Bay 7, which had been converted into an informal training space. What had started as Chancellor Morthek's suggestion that Sarah work with other students had evolved into something much more substantial. Word had spread through the Academy's underground communication networks, and now students from various species regularly gathered to observe or participate in training sessions. Grexthor had become her most dedicated student. His warrior pride transformed into genuine respect for superior technique. Today he faced off against Zethara, the young reptilian who had been one of the first to request training after witnessing Sarah's initial demonstration. Remember, Sarah called out from the center of the zero-gravity chamber, size and strength differences don't disappear just because you learn new techniques. They become tools you can use strategically instead of obstacles you have to overcome. Zethara nodded, her scaled features showing concentration as she studied Grexthor's approach. The Gorinth was moving more carefully now, his attacks planned rather than purely instinctive. Sarah's influence was showing in his improved technique, but it was also evident in something more important: his willingness to think before acting. Grexthor, you're still telegraphing your intentions, Sarah observed. Your shoulders drop before you commit to an attack vector. In real combat, that tells your opponent exactly what you're planning. The massive warrior paused mid-approach, considering her words. 3 weeks ago, he would have dismissed advice from someone he considered inferior. Now he adjusted his posture and tried again, this time masking his intended strike until the last possible moment. Better, Sarah acknowledged. Zethara, your counter was good, but you're still thinking in 2 dimensions. Remember, in zero gravity you can attack from any angle, including ones that would be impossible under normal gravity. The training session continued for another hour, with Sarah providing guidance and correction, while her students worked through increasingly complex scenarios. When it ended, both participants were exhausted but visibly improved from when they had started. As the students filed out, Commander Vexillar entered the chamber. His regular visits to observe Sarah's teaching had become routine, part of the Academy's effort to understand and document human training methodologies. Your technique continues to evolve, he noted, settling into a position where he could speak privately with Sarah. You're becoming quite the instructor. Sarah floated in the center of the chamber, her movements maintaining perfect position without apparent effort. I never thought I'd enjoy teaching, but watching them improve, seeing them gain confidence, it's satisfying in a way I didn't expect. You're giving them more than just combat techniques, Vexillar observed. You're teaching them to think differently about conflict entirely. This was true. Sarah's approach to combat was fundamentally different from what most species taught their warriors. Where others emphasized domination or overwhelming force, she focused on understanding, adaptation, and precise application of minimal necessary force. My trainers never cared about minimizing damage, Sarah said quietly. They wanted maximum effect, maximum fear, maximum psychological impact. Teaching these students the opposite feels like redemption, maybe. Vexillar nodded thoughtfully. In his reports to the Academy administration, he had documented not just Sarah's technical abilities but also the positive changes in her psychological state. The act of teaching seemed to be healing wounds that traditional therapy had struggled to reach. There's something else we need to discuss, he said, his tone becoming more serious. We've received a communication from Earth's diplomatic corps. They want to send a representative to meet with you. Sarah's perfect stillness in zero gravity didn't change, but something in her posture suggested sudden tension. What kind of representative? Someone from their cultural integration department, according to the message. They claim it's a routine check on the progress of human students in galactic institutions. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing implications that Vexillar could only guess at. When? 2 days. Chancellor Morthek wanted you to be prepared. He's also arranged for Academy Legal Counsel to be present during any meetings, should you desire their presence. That might be wise, Sarah said softly. Earth's government has been very interested in how we're adapting to normal life. Sometimes their interest feels more clinical than caring. Vexillar had suspected there was more to Sarah's story than she had revealed in their initial conversation. The care with which Earth's government was monitoring their rescued children suggested concerns beyond simple welfare. Sarah, he said, using her first name instead of the formal address he usually employed. Is there anything else about your background that we should know? Anything that might help us understand what this representative really wants? Sarah finally moved, rotating to face him directly. Her expression was troubled, showing more uncertainty than she had displayed since their first private conversation. There were 47 of us recovered from the pirates, she said slowly. But we weren't the first humans they had taken. We found evidence that they had been capturing human ships for decades, maybe longer. The number of missing people was much higher than Earth's government ever admitted publicly. Vexillar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. How much higher? Hundreds, possibly thousands, and most of them were never found. Sarah's voice remained steady, but her eyes showed old pain. The government was very interested in understanding how the pirates had managed to capture so many ships without detection. They were also very interested in the modifications that had been made to those of us who survived. Modifications? Sarah hesitated, clearly debating how much to reveal. The pirates didn't just train us, Commander. They changed us. Enhanced reflexes, improved healing, modified stress responses. Some of the changes were surgical, others were chemical, a few might have been genetic. The Earth medical teams were never entirely sure what had been done or how. The implications hit Vexillar like a physical blow. Sarah wasn't just a survivor of kidnapping and forced training. She was a living example of illegal human experimentation, possibly on a massive scale. The representative coming to see you, he said carefully, probably isn't here to check on your welfare. No, Sarah agreed. They're probably here to see how well their rehabilitated weapons are integrating into galactic society, and to determine whether we're still useful to them. Vexillar studied the young woman floating before him, seeing her with new understanding. She wasn't just trying to overcome trauma and find a normal life. She was actively resisting efforts to turn her back into the weapon she had been made to be. What do you want to do? He asked. Sarah's answer came without hesitation. I want to keep teaching. I want to help my students become better fighters, not so they can hurt people more effectively, but so they can protect themselves and others when necessary. I want to prove that what the pirates did to us doesn't have to define what we become. She paused, her expression growing more determined. And I want the Earth representative to understand that I'm not their asset anymore. I'm a student at this academy, and I'm under the protection of galactic law. Whatever they think they're going to accomplish here, they're going to be disappointed. Commander Vexillar smiled, a rare expression that transformed his scarred features. In that case, Miss Chen, I think we should make sure you're very well prepared for their visit. And I think your students should be present for the meeting as well. After all, you're their instructor now. They have a vested interest in your continued presence here. Sarah's own smile was small but genuine. For the first time since learning about the impending visit, she felt ready to face whatever Earth's government had planned. She was no longer the frightened child who whispered apologies for existing. She was no longer the weapon that others had forged. She was becoming something new, something she had chosen to be, and she was not going to let anyone take that away from her. She whispered in class until her combat skills were revealed. Part 7. The Earth diplomatic shuttle arrived precisely on schedule. Its sleek design a stark contrast to the diverse array of vessels typically docked at the Academy's spaceport. Sarah watched its approach from the observation deck, flanked by Commander Vexillar and several of her students who had insisted on being present despite her attempts to dissuade them. "Still not too late to reconsider having us there," Grexthor rumbled, his massive form radiating protective energy that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. Sarah shook her head. "This is something I need to handle myself. But knowing you're all here helps more than you realize." The representative who emerged from the shuttle was exactly what Sarah had expected. A middle-aged, human woman in a perfectly tailored diplomatic uniform, her movements crisp and professional. Dr. Elena Vasquez, according to the introduction she provided to Chancellor Morthak, Cultural Integration Specialist for Earth's Department of Interspecies Relations. The formal meeting took place in the Academy's main conference room, with Chancellor Morthak presiding and Academy Legal Counsel present as promised. Dr. Vasquez sat across from Sarah, her expression friendly but calculating in a way that made Sarah's enhanced instincts whisper warnings. "Sarah, you look well," Dr. Vasquez began, her tone warm and maternal. "The Academy's environment seems to agree with you. Your psychological evaluations show remarkable progress." Sarah noted the casual use of her first name and the reference to evaluations she hadn't authorized anyone to share. "Thank you, Dr. Vasquez. I found the academic environment very conducive to growth." "Excellent. That's exactly what we hoped to hear." Dr. Vasquez consulted a data tablet, her movements precise and economical. "Your integration metrics are actually quite impressive. Top 5% academically, positive relationships with faculty and students, and we understand you've even begun teaching combat techniques to other species." The way she said it made Sarah's skin crawl. Integration metrics, as if her life was just a data point in some larger experiment. "Teaching has been rewarding," Sarah said carefully. "It helps me process my own experiences while contributing positively to the Academy community." Dr. Vasquez smiled, but the expression didn't reach her eyes. "That's wonderful, Sarah. It demonstrates exactly the kind of adaptive thinking we hope to see. In fact, it brings us to why I'm here today." Chancellor Morthak leaned forward slightly, his ancient features showing interest but also wariness. "Please, Dr. Vasquez, explain your purpose here." "Of course." Dr. Vasquez shifted in her seat, her posture becoming more formal. "Earth's government has been monitoring the progress of all our recovered citizens as they integrate into galactic society. Sarah's success here has been particularly noteworthy." Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach. "Noteworthy how?" "Your teaching methods, your ability to relate to multiple species, your tactical innovations. They represent exactly the kind of skills Earth needs as we establish our place in the galactic community." Dr. Vasquez's smile broadened. "We'd like to offer you a position with our Cultural Integration Department." The offer hung in the air like a toxin. Sarah could see through the euphemistic language to what was really being proposed. They wanted to turn her into an asset again, using her hard-won normalcy as camouflage for intelligence gathering. "That's very flattering," Sarah said slowly, "but I'm committed to completing my education here." "Oh, we wouldn't interfere with your studies," Dr. Vasquez assured her quickly. "This would be more of a consulting role. Occasional reports on interspecies dynamics, observations about galactic military training methodologies, perhaps some cultural assessment work during Academy breaks." Commander Vexillar's cybernetic eye whirred almost inaudibly as it focused on Dr. Vasquez. "Forgive my curiosity, Dr. Vasquez, but why approach Miss Chen specifically? Surely there are other human students throughout the galaxy who could provide such insights." Dr. Vasquez's pause was barely perceptible, but Sarah caught it. Sarah's unique background gives her perspectives that others might lack. Her experience with multiple species combat techniques makes her observations particularly valuable. Her experience as a child soldier, "You mean?" Chancellor Morthak said bluntly. The diplomatic mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something harder underneath. Sarah's past experiences, whatever they were, have clearly prepared her for unique contributions to human-galactic relations. Sarah felt anger building in her chest, the same cold fury that had once made her such an effective weapon, but now she channeled it differently, using it to fuel clarity rather than violence. "Dr. Vasquez," she said, her voice carrying new authority, "I appreciate Earth's interest in my welfare, but I need to decline your offer. Sarah, perhaps you should take some time to consider." "No." The word cut through the air with finality. "I've spent my entire life being used by people who claimed to know what was best for me. First the pirates who kidnapped me, then the military teams who rescued me, and now a government that wants to turn my recovery into an intelligence operation." Dr. Vasquez's friendly facade was cracking. "Miss Chen, you have obligations to your species and your government." "I have exactly one obligation," Sarah interrupted, rising from her chair. "To myself and to the people who have chosen to trust me. I'm not going to be your asset, Dr. Vasquez. I'm not going to spy on my friends or manipulate the people who've shown me more genuine care than Earth's government ever has." The room fell, silent except for the hum of life support systems. Dr. Vasquez stared at Sarah as if seeing her for the first time, perhaps recognizing that the compliant child soldier they had hoped to recruit no longer existed. "Miss Chen," Dr. Vasquez said finally, her voice losing all pretense of warmth, "you should remember that Earth's protection and support of your education here depends on your continued cooperation with government initiatives." It was a threat, barely disguised. Sarah felt her enhanced reflexes responding to the implied danger, but instead of violence, she found herself smiling, an expression that carried more steel than any weapon. "Dr. Vasquez," Chancellor Morthak interjected before Sarah could respond, "I feel I should remind you that Miss Chen is under the protection of Academy sovereignty. Any attempt to coerce or threaten a student while they are enrolled here would be considered an act of aggression against this institution." The ancient being's voice carried the weight of civilizations, and the implications were clear. The Academy had existed for millennia and commanded respect throughout the galaxy. Earth, for all its emerging influence, was still a newcomer that could not afford to alienate such institutions. Dr. Vasquez seemed to realize she had overplayed her hand. "Of course, Chancellor. I would never suggest anything improper. I was simply hoping to appeal to Miss Chen's sense of civic duty." "My civic duty," Sarah said quietly, "is to become the best person I can be and to help others do the same. If that serves Earth's interest, wonderful. If not, I'm afraid you'll have to find other assets." She remained standing, her posture relaxed but unmistakably final. "Dr. Vasquez, thank you for your visit, but I think our business here is concluded." Dr. Vasquez gathered her materials with sharp, controlled movements. "This conversation isn't over, Miss Chen. Earth has invested considerable resources in your development, and we expect returns on that investment." "Actually," Sarah said as the woman reached the door, "it is over. The girl you invested in died in a pirate slave camp years ago. The woman standing here chose her own path." After Dr. Vasquez left, the conference room remained quiet for several minutes. Finally, Chancellor Morthak spoke. "Miss Chen, are you prepared for the consequences of that decision?" Sarah looked around the room at the beings who had become her advocates and friends. Through the conference room windows, she could see the Academy's courtyards where her students were probably practicing techniques she had taught them. "Chancellor," she said, "for the first time in my life I'm exactly where I want to be, doing exactly what I choose to do. Whatever consequences come from that, I'll face them as myself, not as someone else's weapon." She paused, thinking about the frightened girl who had whispered her way through classes just weeks ago. "Besides," she added with a genuine smile, "I have excellent teachers if I need to learn any new combat techniques." 6 months later, Sarah stood before a graduating class of Academy students, many of whom had trained under her guidance. She no longer whispered, no longer apologized for taking up space, no longer pretended to be anything other than exactly who she had chosen to become. In the audience, Grexthor sat proudly beside Zethara, and a dozen other students who had learned that strength came in many forms. Commander Vexillar nodded approvingly from the faculty section, while Chancellor Morthak presided over the ceremony with ancient wisdom and satisfaction. Sarah had received word that morning of her acceptance into the Academy's Advanced Tactical Studies program, along with an offer to join the faculty as an instructor. Earth's government had made no further contact, apparently deciding that some investments were not worth pursuing. As she accepted her graduation certificate, Sarah reflected on the journey from the terrified child who had whispered apologies for existing to the confident young woman who now taught others to find their own strength. The pirates had